Hello, I'm Wendy Halley, and you're listening to Lucid Cafe. Going in a bit of a different direction in this episode, I thought it would be fun to talk with my brother Tim, who happens to be one of my favorite people on the planet. We talk about humanity's fascination with monsters. As kids growing up in the 70s, our babysitters were frequently Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, Godzilla, and the werewolf, which is mostly my fault because I was supposed to be the older, more responsible sibling. In this episode, Tim and I wax poetic about our own fascination with creatures of the night, and then we pretend we know what we're talking about as we explore why humans are so drawn to the shadow archetype and what this might suggest about our collective relationship with evil. I hope you enjoy my conversation with the one and only Tim Stofan. Hey, Tim, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey.
It's my pleasures.
So happy you decided to do this with me. So
I kind of feel obligated in a way.
What, because you're my brother?
Yeah. I ain't heavy.
Yeah, it's true. You aren't heavy.
Well, anyways.
So, yeah, I wanted to have you on because of your interest in films and television. And I wanted to cover this topic because I think it's really fascinating, but I want to go into it a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
I want to talk about kind of the archetype of the monster.
Yeah.
These shadowy characters and what they represent for us as humans.
Uh-huh.
And I think, because I've done some thinking about this. I think it reveals a lot of really interesting things about humans.
Mm-hmm.
So let me start out by asking you, Tim, what is your favorite monster?
I think ever since I was a little kid, it's always been werewolves. And you even dressed me up as a werewolf for Halloween when I was probably about 6 or 7, I think.
Yeah, I remember that because I glued fur to your face and we couldn't get it off.
It was cotton balls or something. Yeah.
It was actual fur from my monster makeup kit.
Oh, okay.
I glued it with spirit gum onto your face, and then I didn't have any spirit gum remover.
That sounds vaguely familiar, yeah.
And Mom was not happy with me.
Well, story of our lives, right? So,
yeah. So is it still werewolves?
Yeah, it is. I've always had a thing for the transformation, the strength, and kind of the just the raw nature of that the creature, because I don't really like the werewolf concept of which is from the straight lore of a man turning just straight into a wolf. I like more of the later interpretations of the man beast. You know what I mean? Like it's like a hybrid, and as we see in most films. But like in like those goofy, what are those lovey vampire movies? You know, they turn into
lovey vampire movies.
The Twilight movies. They turn straight into wolves, and it's not really quite as interesting to me. Versus like say American Werewolf in London, which is my favorite. It's my only favorite werewolf movie ever done. And
that's it. That one.
Yeah, I think they all suck, to be honest. It's never been done well. There's been a lot of attempts, and there's some that come close, but that's the only one that's ever really done it for me. And there's a certain there's something about that savagery that speaks to me.
Well, that's not revealing about you at all.
Right.
Well, I remember going to see American Werewolf in London in the theater back when it originally came out, and I thought it was amazing. I thought it was a really cool film, and I loved the way that they captured the transformation. It seemed like I remember thinking when I was watching it, I don't remember how old I was. It was in the 70s, right?
No, it's 1980 or 1981, I think.
Okay,
1981.
Close.
Yeah.
So I remember thinking, like, God, the way they captured that transformation, it seems like that's exactly what it would feel like.
Yeah, and John Landis has many times has spoken out about how he felt that every time prior to that, it has always been the overlay transformation of the man sits still, and then they do the screen overlay until he just wakes up and he's a
like
werewolf.
the Lon Chaney.
Right, exactly. And his thought was, well, the reality is if your bones are stretching and changing, it's going to hurt. What's yours?
I'd have to say the vampire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always had a soft spot for vampires. And what's interesting is that you and I, one of the many things we have in common is a very sensitive nervous system.
Yeah, right.
I think we both fall under the category of highly sensitive people.
Mm-hmm.
And what's fascinating to me is that when you do the assessment for a highly sensitive person, one of the categories gets deeply disturbed by violent images in film or television.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it's something along those lines. That's the only criteria that I don't meet. Ever since I was little, I haven't had a problem watching scary movies, and I still don't.
So who was your influence on that? Because obviously you were my influence in breaking into horror movies. And for me, I know it started with us watching Chiller Theater, and with the hand that comes out of the ground and eats the letters, Chiller. Yeah. And we would sit and watch monster movies and stuff like that. So who was it for you that you did that? Was there anyone?
I don't remember. I think it may have been Mom. Although, I kind of remember watching them by myself as a kid, watching Creature Features and the Chiller Theater. I remember watching them by myself, but I'm guessing that Mom probably tuned in because she was digging that stuff too when we were kids.
Right. Yeah. She had her little spell of witchcraft and
which we won't talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was really interested in the darker side of life too, and maybe that's why. I mean, she was really intrigued by. I don't know if you remember, she had a book on demonology.
Yeah. Oh, I have it.
You have the book now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's revealing of us again.
Yeah. How about that?
But that was in that time where it was starting to, I think it was early 70s that she had all that stuff.
Yeah,
right?
She had a Ouija board. And
that was kind of the thing.
It was trendy back then.
Counterculture, and
our mother was definitely in the counterculture.
For sure.
Yeah. What do you think is your attraction to monster movies or scary movies? Why do you think you like watching them?
I like this perpetual boy inside of me, this curiosity. There's something intriguing about something that's outside of the natural realm. You know what I mean? The curiosity of a creature that is not known to be. You know what I mean? Like,
do you like that there's a connection to humans? That humans can become monsters, or like the werewolf, for example?
No, I don't think that's what it is. I think it's more the end result for me. It's more about the monster than it is the transformation. Because when I was young, I also enjoyed Godzilla films too. And those, that's just a big giant thing. I always had a thing for dinosaurs and stuff, they're so far removed that they're like monsters, but they were, even though they genuinely existed, but they're almost alien in a way.
Unless you watch the Flintstones.
Right. But there's also, I think there's a bit of a, what am I looking for? Like a thrill seeking. There's an adrenaline rush. Some people do it by jumping bicycles or motorcycles. And some people, you find your addiction in a different way. And some people get addicted to that adrenaline rush you get from being absorbed in a threatening, scary movie. Because in that movie, ultimately when it's over for the most part. Yeah,
so do you think it's more like a test?
Yeah, survival.
Yeah, but it's a safe one because I mean, do you know you're watching a movie when you're watching it, right? Or do you get so absorbed in it
that you get so absorbed in it that I'm not, if it's a good scary movie, I think I'll be absorbed to a point. But here's what happens. No, I might take that back. I might go back on that, because what happens is I get so freaked out that I come out of it, and then I'll start laughing, You know what I mean? It becomes a funny moment to me. Like I don't know if I told you this on phone, but I watched Hereditary about 2 months ago. And there was, this is funny. I got hungry in the middle of it and I started eating a bowl of cornflakes with chopped up bananas in it. And I'm just like mowing that down and I'm almost done. And then this scene starts to happen that's incredibly intense and building, and it's going to be disturbing. And you know it's going to be disturbing. And I just, like, all of a sudden I could feel my stomach tighten up on those cornflakes. And I just, like, I started laughing really hard. I started going, and I was talking out loud to myself. I was like, I'm going to be sick. I'm going to be sick. And I couldn't stop laughing because it was so visceral.
That's an interesting reaction. Yeah.
I know, but it was funny to me. I found
that's what's interesting, is that you're laughing as you're being really disturbed.
Yeah.
And you're trying to eat cornflakes.
Yeah. I think also the absurdity of that situation, the way it sounds.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. It just, I think I even had to pause it and just kind of laugh it out for a second. I find for me what's happening is I'm getting a little too caught up on what's going on in the movie, and it starts causing a physical reaction, right? And whether this is the cornflake situation or say I take a moment to scan my environment for threats in the apartment or house and or my shoulders and jaw tense up, what ends up happening is whatever that is, it takes me out of the moment. So, I'm like in it for a minute and then something kind of jars me out of it.
Right.
And then I become like kind of, self-aware, and it's like I step out of myself. I view the situation and I go, boy, this is a ridiculous situation. 46-year-old man sitting in his apartment alone in the dark, scaring himself with movies. And
while eating cereal.
While eating cereal or whatever it is. And that's when it becomes a funny situation. And I think that laughing helps disarm that fear from 30 seconds ago. You know what I mean?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's been times I know, like, where I've been in perilous situations that aren't related to horror or whatever. And at the end of it, I've just kind of laughed. Like, holy shit, that's ridiculous. I can't believe that happened. There's a situation that happened on my motorcycle once, and another situation where a cow jumped out of nowhere in front of my car. And I almost ran right into it. It was a full-on fucking cow. And I look in my mirror and it just kind of trods off through traffic. And I couldn't help but burst out laughing, like, what the fuck just happened?
You're laughing right now.
Yeah, I know. It's the same reflex. It's like, it's so absurd. But, and I was.
Well, that's.
Yeah. And my adrenaline was through the roof. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I had to swerve to not hit it. And wow.
So you have the same reactions to real life kind of shocking things that you do when you're watching a scary film?
It seems like it, yeah.
Okay. Because I was thinking
more an older age.
Because you're an old man?
Yeah, I'm an old man.
Yeah.
Middle age, whatever.
I was just thinking the opposite for myself, is that when I'm watching a scary film, and I think this has been the case since I was little, that I know it's not real.
Yeah.
And I think there's a part of me that understands it's not real. However, if in real life I were to see something gory or horrific, an accident or anything, it really messes me up. And I can't see stuff in person.
Right.
But I can see all kinds of stuff.
Right. Because, we're both fans of The Walking Dead, and we've got to admit that's about as gory as it gets. And it doesn't really disturb me.
No, it doesn't disturb me either.
In the evolution of horror films, they started out as monsters because it came from a time period where we're not that far out from farmland and the dark woods and the unknown, right? So you have the mummies and the werewolves and the vampires and all that stuff, which are part of lore, right? And then as time goes on, and then different threats come to us over time. You have the atomic age and giant bugs and all this shit, and space travel comes alien invasions, and then all of that stuff starts to wear out because it doesn't happen. and then the threat becomes man himself, and it starting with a movie like Psycho in 1960, where Alfred Hitchcock takes it on its edge and makes the man the monster. You know what I'm saying?
That's a really interesting it's an interesting theory. It's an interesting thread to look at film by. One of the things I wanted to do in our conversation today was to look at the vampire in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and how the character of the vampire has
It's
evolved
evolved. Yeah.
over time. Because I used to teach a humanities course at the community college in Vermont
Mm-hmm.
called the Vampire in Literature, Film, and Culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a strange course, and we watched a vampire movie every week throughout the semester. And as I was creating the curriculum for the course and picking out what literature to read and what films to watch, I started noticing this pattern, or this, I don't know if pattern's the right word, this trend. And what I discovered was that the vampire in particular, this character, when the vampire first showed itself in popular
And
culture,
yeah,
I
and
mean,
I was gonna say written
because
down. It was in spoken
because it's
lore for
it's been, yeah,
centuries.
the vampire, every culture's had some sort of
Yeah.
vampiric character wreaking havoc. But if you look at it from the time of film, well, in the book Dracula, which predates film, the character of Dracula is this foreboding, charming character who lives far away
Mm-hmm.
in Transylvania in a castle. And he has this sort of elegance about him. So he's inviting. But what's interesting about the character of Dracula is that there are rules. And one of the rules is that there's a threshold. You have to invite him over the
Mm-hmm.
threshold. If you look at the vampire as symbolic of evil, and you look at the vampire representing maybe the human's relationship with evil, and then you look at how the vampire has evolved over 100 years, you'd start seeing that our relationship with evil starts to evolve over time. So it went from this character that lives far away in this exotic place, in a castle, that has to be invited in. So the evil is far away. As long as you don't invite it in, you're safe from it. And then you start moving forward in time. The vampire becomes this character in the 80s. With, I think Anne Rice was monumental in making this big shift in the nature of the vampire, where she humanized them, so they became these characters that you could relate to.
Mm-hmm. And
And you actually,
sexual
yeah,
beings.
well, they were very sexual, and they but I think even Dracula had this sexuality to
Yeah,
him.
he had a sexuality to him for sure, but
Or
her rules of sexuality made more sense. I think
what
the
do you mean?
gender is irrelevant.
But I think from a psychological standpoint, what's interesting is that you start having empathy for the vampire, because what she does, and what hadn't been done yet until Anne Rice, I believe, is that she writes from the vampire's perspective.
Yeah.
So you have empathy for the character, and you get to see what life was like from the perspective of a vampire, that there's this immortality, that they're going to live forever, and that means they watch all their loved ones die, and then
Mm-hmm.
so they're very much alone, and they're tortured in that way, like Brad Pitt's character in the film
View with a
Interview with a
Vampire.
Vampire, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
in the book too.
Well, a lot of the other thing too that influences, I think, in the Bram Stoker area, the Victorian era, I should say, and prior, is plague, and the correlation to death and plague. A lot of living dead lore, because before vampires originally, I think, are just basically zombies. As far as like the old Slavic traditions go, they're not really like these fanged, charming creatures. They're just zombies as we know it, that get out of the grave and suck blood, kind of thing, to
Or they
fill
eat
the.
brains.
Yeah, well, yeah, that comes from George Romero specifically, but yeah. But anyway, actually, no, the eating brains comes from Return of the Living Dead, but I digress. So there's a lot of that stuff too. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to know exactly where Bram Stoker's frame of mind was, because it was so long ago. But I do know that there a lot of the scary looming sicknesses and all that stuff played a part in creating that lore
Oh yeah,
in
definitely.
Transylvania,
Because
Romania,
the
and all that.
rats,
Yeah, right. The rats and
were part of
the
the
bats too.
story.
And the bats carrying rabies and shit like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so you go from this vampire character who's far away but needs to be invited in, and then you understand, like 50 years later ish, you start seeing the vampire as this character that you can have empathy for. So what does that say about our relationship with evil at that
Hmm.
point? Is like, all right, so we're starting to kind of make friends with it. And then you go all the way up to the early 2000s when the Twilight series comes out, and now the vampire is somebody you want to marry and have its baby.
Yeah, and it's not even a threat, and it can go out on the sunlight, and
Yeah, so
it's so
if
dumbed down that it's kind of ridiculous.
but if what does it say about our relationship with evil?
Right,
That we're getting closer to, I would say, from a again from a psychological standpoint, that we're embracing it.
right.
We're like literally by marrying it and having its baby. And in I think there's another film that we watched in the class,
Well,
28
the
Days.
one with Josh Hartnett, I was thinking,
Yeah.
was kind of a return to just violent, mindless vampires, and that's 30 Days of Night. And
Oh, 30, yeah, 30 Days of Night. So in that film, he volunteers to become the vampire at the end to save the day. So he actually becomes evil in
hmm.
order to save the day.
Yeah,
That's one of the things that's been interesting in the last several decades, these characters wanting to become vampires,
right.
like in the Twilight series.
Not to go too far on a tangent, but just to touch on this a little bit, I think in a lot of pop culture that's become the case where the bad guys have almost become the one you want to be more than anything else. Say you're Darth Vader or you're a Joker and stuff like that. There's something more appealing to these more because they seem more interesting and more. There's more to grab onto their psychology than there is
Well,
than
yeah, exactly.
the plain Jane hero guy.
They're not black and white anymore.
Right.
So they have complexities where they're not all bad and they're not all good. They're both. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But it also, I mean, just think about it. If you think about how that reflects human nature and a way in which we might be evolving, I think it reflects this, that we're looking at our complexities more instead of looking at life in this more black and white sort of way. That
Hmm.
that there's good and there's evil. So each of us has all of that within ourselves.
Hmm.
That's what's fascinating to me. And that it's so, like, I think you can take any monster,
Hmm.
the vampire, the werewolf, or whatever, and you can look at it and you can see how it reflects our relationship with our shadow side. Why, of all the characters that are out there, were you drawn to the werewolf? Like, what
Hmm.
does that say about you?
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever fully answered that question,
That you
but
wish you had more hair. Yeah.
you son of a. I had plenty when I was younger, but anyway, what was I going to say? Well, the other thing too that I found, especially in rewatching over this past Halloween, as we're recording this, we're entering November of 2018. I've watched a handful of different movies and shows that are kind of dissecting and taking apart horror movies. And a lot of times there's an underlying subtext, and George Romero, getting back to him, he's one of the main guys for doing this. He's the one that created the modern zombie, but every one of his movies is a different take on satirizing the shitty parts of humanity. Well, it's social commentary each time. And so in the very first Night of the Living Dead, it's basically about race. The movie was made in 1968 during the civil rights upheaval, and it was one of the first movies to ever have a black hero. And it shows at the end kind of the brutality. He's just mistaken for a zombie and taken out and just thrown on the pile and burned with the rest of the bodies as if he never really mattered in the whole situation.
Oh, wow.
The next one he did in the mid 70s was Dawn of the Dead, and that takes place in the mall. And there's a big commentary on that about consumerism and how
Right.
American consumerism is basically there's a scene there where a woman's asking the scientist guy, why do you think these zombies are coming here? What, they're not calling them zombies, and he basically was like, it's just memories of a past life doing what they knew what to do. And they're just like, these the Walking Dead are riding escalators from the lower floor up to the, it's just kind of, and it's like, it doesn't look much different from when they were alive. They were like at these mindless consumers just riding an escalator, and then all the way to The Walking Dead, which is And, obviously Romero's not involved with that, but that becomes this whole battle of humanity itself. Who's the worst enemy, and
It's a
who is?
reflection
Yeah,
of this time too, this
right.
the apocalyptic nature of life on planet Earth right now. Like
The Walking Dead reflects what we fear today, like virus and the earth dying and all this stuff like that, and illness.
yeah,
Yeah, and then of course, you add the Road Warrior element to The Walking Dead, which is, are the zombies the threat, or is it the subcultures of humans like the governor and Negan?
oh yeah, no, to me, The Walking Dead is more about the the human
Mm-hmm,
interactions and how horrible humans can be to one another, or how they can actually join together and pull
mm-hmm.
amazing things off. And the zombies are just backdrop
Yeah,
as this constant threat that's always there,
yeah, creating a challenge.
and
Yeah,
that you will become when you die.
right. And I know this sounds silly, but people don't really realize this. But the very original Godzilla movie in 1954 is a fully Japanese movie, not the one with Raymond Burr. They literally edited in Raymond Burr in different sections of the original movie and made it an American movie. And that was in 1956. The original Japanese one, it's basically a reflection on imperial Japanese culture and what it can get you. And Godzilla is the result of being greedy and all that. And this is literally what the filmmaker was doing when he made it. He was basically saying Hiroshima and Nagasaki is a result of Japanese imperialism, and I'm reflecting this in a monster movie, and atomic radiation causing this giant beast who has a skin texture that looks reminiscent of burn victims from Hiroshima. There's scenes where he is using his radioactive heat ray on people and basically disintegrating them, and all that's left is the burned shadow in the wall, just like what really happened. So that
When
is
the
a
bombs were
literal,
dropped, yeah.
yeah. That movie is a lot more serious than the Raymond Burr version. We kind of dumbed it down when we brought it over 2 years later, and it has a kind of a heavy heart to it, and it's forcing Japan to look at itself.
The maker of that film actually intended to
Destroy Tokyo, and basically in a way of saying, look what we did. This is kind of like a monster movie reflection of what really happened. You know what I mean? If you can see yourself on screen, you can be a little more self-critical maybe. I think a lot of times too, what monster movies and monsters do are they are a way to try and just investigate the unknown. And going back to my theory on the evolution of horror films, they're basically probing at the crux of the era. And like I said, in post-World War II, it was a combination of the atomic age and the space race. So then there's those types of threats and what would happen if, and then we figure that out, that it's kind of a little far-fetched. So then the evolution becomes something else, right? So we're probing the unknown, I think, right? Whereas like when you go back to, say, pre-cinema, like a Victorian era or pre-Victorian, where it's, village to village, where witchcraft is the thing, right? And it's like the threat is right next door, because whatever's not godly enough, you know what I mean? And then you got, if it's not godly enough, just for God's sake, burn the shit out of it, or drown it. and the woods themselves represent the unknown. And nature, for whatever reason, with the Christian thing, is a big threat. And that's where witchcraft comes from, right? The worship of nature.
Yeah, that they're all kind of loaded topics, but a lot of the lore is born out of people not understanding why things happened the way they did, why some kind of natural event would happen. Did they anger the gods, or the vampire lore, thinking someone was dead, but they really weren't dead, and
Mm-hmm.
back before medicine was
well, and the thing is they didn't understand coma either. People were buried alive quite regularly, and they had this thing going on.
Horrific.
Yeah, I know, with the breathing tubes and the string with a bell.
With the bell, yeah, I remember hearing
right.
about
So
that. Yeah.
if you were awake, you could, ring the bell and someone will dig you up. On the opposite end, what they used to do, and I don't know if I've told you this before, I've mentioned it on my own thing, but the legend of the stake through the heart for the vampire comes from, the Eastern European lore of the Walking Dead coming out of the graves. And it wasn't so much to kill the undead, it was to keep the body in the ground so that it couldn't rise after it had been buried. And then it slowly got through the game of telephone and storytelling, it turned into the only way to kill a vampire is to puncture its heart with a wooden stake. But that's where it originally evolved out of.
I guess that would take care of things, huh?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Right. And we were talking about the unknown and tying it back into vampire lore. All of vampire lore is the lack of science, and you don't really know how a body decomposes. So when they would dig them back up, the blood would be coming out of the mouth, being regurgitated from the stomach. The stomach would swell from the gases expanding, and the people would look at that and think, well, the combination of the blood coming out of his mouth and a swollen stomach, he just must have been up last night feeding on blood.
And this is pre-funeral home.
Right. Oh, yeah. Again, plague era times. The other thing, too, is the receding of the cuticles as the body decomposes. And the gums, right. It makes the teeth look bigger and the fingernails.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of weird shit going on there. And
that's because there are vampires.
Yeah, right.
Yes, I mean, humans throughout history have come up with stories and myths around why things are the way they are, why shit happens, and they stick.
Right. There is an actual condition called lycanthropy, like a psychological condition where people believe they are werewolves. And I know in recent Wikipedia study, I saw something that there are 13 or 14 known cases, documented cases since 1850 of people claiming to be werewolves or lycanthropes and have killed people as a result. And if you watch the original Wolfman movie with Lon Chaney from 1941, it opens on the definition of what lycanthropy means. And it's basically, either the action of turning to a wolf by the light of the full moon or believing to turn into a werewolf by the light of the full moon. And if you watch the movie, you'll notice no one ever sees him as a werewolf except his victims. So there's no actual proof that he is a wolf, or is he killing as a man, and he's the only one that thinks he's a wolf. So
the original Wolfman movie is really just a kind of an exploration of lycanthropy.
Yes.
The psychological condition.
Right.
Wow, that puts a whole different twist on it.
It really does.
Do you think we all have the capacity within ourselves to be evil?
Yeah, I think there's to varying degrees, because here's the thing. Maybe it has something going back to where we started the conversation with the highly sensitive thing. If I'm a highly sensitive person, it's almost like I can put myself in other people's shoes really easily. And since I can do that, maybe there's kind of an interest to test the waters of a darkness. I don't think it's not like I want to go out and do it. But then I also feel like there's a spectrum of sanity, right? From highly empathetic to psychopathic, right? And you can have a sociopath who basically lives out his dark desires through fighter jets or being a soldier or something like that. Or, you know what I mean? And doesn't necessarily end up having to be an evil person. So
Freud would have referred to that as sublimation.
Mm-hmm.
Freud was a freak, but his defense mechanisms were right on the money. And sublimation is basically the idea that you will act out your violent tendencies in a safe way, or in a socially acceptable way. So like the surgeon using a scalpel.
Yeah.
It's to actually cut into people.
Yeah, that's a good one.
In a way to be of service to them rather than to harm them.
And if you think about it, to be a successful surgeon, you have to be a very regimented, kind of egotistical, almost megalomaniac type of person, which is similar to a serial killer.
So yeah, you're saying that surgeons are like high functioning serial killers
Yeah, well, I think serial
or
killers are
socially accepted.
I think serial killers are high functioning. You know, they're a lot of them are close to genius level.
Well, yeah, I think there's also a spectrum within that realm, and that's not a specialty I have. I couldn't really speak to it,
Right.
but this idea, I think we all do have the capacity to be evil, and that we're doing what we can to manage that.
Yeah.
And those of us who are not sociopaths or psychopaths can keep that stuff at bay. And maybe that's the appeal of watching horror films
Hmm. Yeah, you get to live it out that
and
way.
true crime, because it safely appeases those tendencies that we might have
Hmm.
without actually having to act them out.
With the rise of true crime popularity, do you feel like trauma plays a role in people who love true crime because they're trying to kind of connect with something that's happened to them in a way? I'm just wondering.
So you're trying to figure out, is there a pattern to who's drawn to true
Listening,
crime?
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's always going to be regular things, but
Well,
I'm wondering if trauma plays a role in that.
I would have to say, actually, I don't think
No?
trauma plays a role in it. It might. I mean, I'm just trying to think of my years as a clinician and how very traumatized people typically avoid material that's really upsetting to them,
Yeah.
or can be reminiscent of their own experience, or
Hmm.
that there's a heightened sensitivity there. I think that the interest in true crime and serial killers in particular is more of a human interest.
Right.
They're kind of fascinating.
But then there's still this kind of morbid curiosity about hearing about the gross things they'll do.
Right.
Whether it's a serial killer or just a regular someone who loses his shit in the moment. Anybody who listens to Sword Scale, you're kind of waiting to hear about the horrible thing the person does to the other person, and I'm like, why?
Maybe
Why do I do this?
maybe you are. No one else is. Just
No, I don't
you.
believe that at all.
I'm
Because
just teasing.
I've heard too many people say the same thing.
No, I think it's just a human fascination with what humans are capable of.
Yeah, it must go back to what we were talking about before.
Yeah, the darkness within
The
us.
darkness, yeah,
It's a safe way to explore it.
right.
I mean, I can't claim to know exactly why it's so intriguing, but I'm just trying to think, why do I like, just a curiosity, I think.
What I was saying in the beginning about the why I enjoy the werewolf or the beast or whatever, it's the same thing. It's the savagery in which it takes its victims. I don't know why I find that fascinating. Yeah, but I think now you get into we jump from Freud to Darwin. The way we got here was on the shoulders of those we slaughtered. You know what I mean? Once we've become certain civilized to a certain point, that gets diluted quite a bit. But up until a few hundred years ago, you know, it's a pretty brutal lifestyle. All the people who get to procreate are the ones who are the winners of the wars. You know what I mean?
The
And to be
conquerors.
right, the conquerors, and to be the winners of the wars, you're typically the more natural via natural selection. You're the more powerful. You're the stronger. You're the more cunning. Or a combination of that. You know, you have your general leading you a certain way, and your best soldiers up front, and then those soldiers get the best ladies at the end of the day, and you know, or
Rape and
rape
pillage.
the lady, right, rape
Yeah.
the ladies of the other land, you know, and then there's diversity in the culture because you're not interbreeding with amongst yourselves, and so basically what I'm saying is
Aggression,
there's an
aggression
inherent
survives.
violence
Yeah.
that is passed on and almost reinforced.
So aggression is selected.
Selected, I feel like, yeah. Genghis Khan has a 25% genetic representation in Asia
He got
because
around.
and he won so much. But he was a brutal dude too. So, you know, there's that. My point is that it has to be passed into your DNA.
Okay. So then, what was I
So
just
I'm
going to
agreeing with you.
Oh, yeah. So that's what I was going to say. Have humans evolved that much? Or
No,
do you feel
no, I
like,
don't think so. I think we think we have, and then because of technology, technology is like a spit polishing a silver fork. You know what I mean? It makes us look a lot better than we are, but the core of who we are, boy, you want me to stay away from politics?
No, you can say whatever you want.
Okay. If you look at where we're at in our political state at the moment, there's zero evolution there. In fact, we're stepping backwards. And then the thing about evolution too is it's not linear. There's no, you know what I mean? It branches off on different things, and there's setbacks and goes forward and back.
So we have opposable thumbs, and we're upright, and we have these large brains, and yet emotionally, that's where I feel like we're not very evolved as emotional beings and spiritual beings too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have a ways to go yet. I have been known to say the human race is not very evolved.
Right.
And you just look around and look at how we behave and how we treat each other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not across the board that everyone is.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a generalized statement, but
it's a spectrum.
Yeah,
like a bell curve. I just think emotionally we can get very caught. Maybe it's our consciousness that hasn't evolved enough yet, because we get stuck in these patterns and we play them out even though they hurt us, but they're so deeply unconscious. And so maybe that's part of the draw to monsters.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us all about your show?
Okay.
That you're working on.
Well, it's not ready yet. It's been in the process for 8 years. But we're really working on it to come out probably, I'm assuming, after the new year. But it's a film and TV podcast. My friend Derek Shadowins and I discuss a different topic for every episode, whether it be like we said, aliens in film, or McCarthyism, to the influence of the 70s and what a dark and weird time that was for filmmaking. And we break down Breaking Bad, the entire 5 seasons of that. And the show is going to be called Transmissions from the Forbidden Planet, and it's a play on an old sci-fi movie called The Forbidden Planet, starring Leslie Nielsen. So we're going to have probably 2 episodes a month at about an hour to an hour and a half per episode, with a special 2-hour-long Patreon episode also every month for those who subscribe at a certain subscriber point. But look for that on like Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff. I think we're going to be at Transmissions Pod on both of those, and once we get launched. But again, it won't probably be till after the new year.
So that would be 2019.
2019, the new year of 2019.
All right. Well, and I've had a sneak preview of a couple of different episodes, and it's really well done.
My partner's been messing around. He had his own little podcast back like 12 years ago, when this was all new stuff. And so he's been dabbling with editing and putting sound clips and all that stuff together for years, and he's amazingly good. So I'm very proud of his
production
work.
Quality is really nice. It's really good. And it's
yeah, we have very good chemistry.
Yeah,
so.
It's entertaining, really entertaining.
Thanks.
So yeah, I hope everybody checks out your podcast.
Yeah, and yours.
Well, thanks, Tim. And thanks for coming on. Thanks for humoring me.
No sweat.
No
humor at all. It was not funny whatsoever.
Oh, you.
That was a bad joke. All right.
Thanks, Tim.
See ya.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this window into my relationship with my brother, and I hope you check out Tim and Derek's podcast, Transmissions from the Forbidden Planet, when they launch in 2019. Thanks for tuning in. Pleasant dreams.